So one of my favorite topics that I've always found to be fascinating is chronic PTSD or complex PTSD. So it's like PTSD that comes from childhood trauma that shapes attachment theory, and so as intergenerational trauma occurs, it's like trauma passed on to the next, from one parent to the kid, and it leads to a kid thinking that their traumatic, unresolved parents' issues are normal. So it perpetuates a cycle of addiction, or parents enable each other to a non-tolerable environment, and so the kid is kind of confused about what's normal. And so in attachment theory, it's like really most people want to have securely attached parents, but most of the time parents are not there or there, so you could get anxious attachment where you're clingy, or avoidant anxious attachment where you're clingy. And what it comes down to is the attachment theory relates to how their parents treated them. So if your parents dismissed you and didn't make you feel important, that's dismissive avoidant attachment. And so that person has a hard time connecting with people because they see people as dangerous. So you see the impact of parents make kids later in life take it out on other people, which is really not their fault because they don't know any different. But this is why there's always like dysfunctional relationships, because each person trying to patch in their wound, but the wounds are solidified in early childhood. So they're going off something that they think is normal. And parents perpetuate this, and eventually kids don't know how to correct it. And in correcting it is actually analyzing the fact that your parents actually never resolve their issues. And what you have is kind of a byproduct, which is not your fault, because each person that recovers from trauma makes the investment to be the survivor and change and improve, because they don't want to carry that same behavior to their kids or friends or spouse. And that is a big part of also who survives trauma and who stays the victim, which then perpetuates trauma bonding, enmeshment, toxic family dynamics, which will completely alter the course of someone's life, because it's hard to know how to change something that was embedded so early on that's normal. But it's very possible. You have to just dive into thinking about, well, if my parents did this, why do they act a certain way? So you have to kind of examine what is actually normal and not. And sometimes reading or getting books to reframe how you think really help. There's a lot of books on trauma and complex PTSD that make you understand how your childhood leads to a sequence of attachment problems, relational problems, trauma problems, confidence. It's almost the igniter of self-esteem.